I'm Nancy, a 32-year-old assistant professor at the University of Chicago. My life seems pretty sorted now: academic achievements, a supportive network, and a city that's become my home. But the truth is, my past is a tangled mess that still shadows my present. Sometimes, it feels like I'm on the edge of a deep chasm, looking back into a childhood I'd rather forget. I remember my early years vividly, living in a cozy house in a small town in Indiana with my parents. Those were the days when my world was full of laughter, warmth, and the comfort of knowing I was loved. My mother was the center of my universe. She was kind, wise, and had an unspoken way of making everything better. My father was a loving husband and a good dad, but after my mother's unexpected death, everything changed. When she died, it was like the ground had been ripped from beneath us. I was only 15, and the loss was unbearable. My father was devastated, and I could see how grief consumed him. In his overwhelming sorrow, he didn't have the strength to comfort me. Instead, he sought solace elsewhere and soon brought Catherine into our lives. Catherine was not just a stranger. She was cold, manipulative, and abusive. I remember the day she first walked into our house. I was sitting on the porch steps, clutching a worn-out book, trying to make sense of the world. Catherine stepped out of the car with an air of arrogance that made me uneasy. My father was visibly relieved, perhaps hoping that she would fill the void left by my mother's absence. But for me, her arrival marked the end of my childhood happiness. Catherine wasted no time making her presence felt. She didn't need to shout or be overtly cruel. Her mere presence created a chilling atmosphere. It started with small things: her disdainful comments, her ability to turn even the smallest incident into a dramatic affair. The house that once echoed with laughter became a place where every corner seemed to harbor tension. It wasn't long before her cruelty escalated. Catherine would go out of her way to torment me. I remember how she ruined my belongings, my favorite books, my cherished toys, even my clothes. The damage was always subtle enough to be dismissed as accidents. But the worst was the physical pain she inflicted, always in ways that were easy to hide. I learned quickly that no matter how much it hurt, I had to keep silent. I tried to reach out to my father for help, but he refused to see the truth. When I told him about Catherine's behavior, he would get angry and dismiss me as being ungrateful or imagining things. He had become so enmeshed in his grief and Catherine's manipulative charms that he couldn't, or wouldn't, see the reality of the situation. I remember one particular incident vividly. Miss Jenkins, my teacher, had noticed the bruises on my arms and the sadness in my eyes. She approached me gently, asking if everything was all right. I was terrified. Catherine's threats had instilled a deep fear in me, and I couldn't risk angering her further. I lied, saying everything was fine, even though I was far from okay. Things reached a breaking point when Ms. Jenkins decided to intervene. She contacted my father and arranged a meeting at school. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, he would see reason and take action. Instead, when my father arrived, he accused me of lying and punished me further by locking me in my room. The emotional wound of being disbelieved by the one person who was supposed to protect me was deeper than any physical pain. Desperate and with nowhere to turn, I made a decision that would change everything. I reached out to my grandmother, who lived in Chicago. She had always been a beacon of love and safety in my life. Her home was a stark contrast to the hostility of my childhood. I wrote her a letter, pouring out my heart, hoping she would understand the gravity of my situation. When my grandmother received the letter, she didn't hesitate. She came to Indiana, confronting my father and demanding that I be allowed to live with her. Despite Catherine's protests and my father's reluctance, my grandmother's love and determination prevailed. It was the first time in a long while that I felt a glimmer of hope. Packing up my belongings and leaving that house felt like stepping out of a nightmare. I was leaving behind the place that had been both my home and my prison. Moving to Chicago was like waking up to a new world, a world where love was real and safety wasn't just a fleeting dream. I had escaped the clutches of Catherine's cruelty and my father's indifference. I was moving towards a future where I hoped to heal from the scars of my past. Little did I know, This was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter that would force me to confront my past head-on and find the strength to stand up for myself. Moving to Chicago marked the start of a new chapter in my life. My grandmother's house was like a sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe without the constant weight of fear pressing down on me. Her home, filled with warmth and the smell of freshly baked cookies, was everything my childhood home had not been. My grandmother, Margaret, was in her late 70s, but her spirit was as vibrant as ever. She had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the world. Her home was a cozy, two-story house on a tree-lined street with a garden full of colorful flowers and a swing set that reminded me of happier times. From the moment I arrived, it was clear that my life was about to change. Margaret welcomed me with open arms, and her love was like a balm to my wounded heart. She listened patiently as I recounted the horrors I had endured, never once doubting me or brushing off my pain. For the first time in years, I felt heard and understood. Despite the warmth of her home, adjusting to life in a new city was challenging. Chicago was bustling and loud, a far cry from the quiet town in Indiana where I had grown up. I had to navigate a new school, new friends, and a new routine. But Margaret was my constant support, and her presence made the transition smoother. One of the first things I did was enroll in the local high school. It was daunting to start over, but I was determined to make the most of this fresh start. The school was big, and I felt like a small fish in a vast ocean. But Margaret encouraged me to join clubs and make friends, which helped me slowly adjust to my new life. Despite the new environment, there were moments when the past would creep back in. The fear of Catherine's retaliation never completely left me, and there were nights when I would wake up, drenched in sweat, reliving the worst moments of my life. But Margaret's soothing presence and gentle words helped me find the strength to face those fears. My grandmother's support went beyond emotional comfort. She made sure I had everything I needed to succeed academically and personally. She helped me with my homework, encouraged me to pursue my interests, and even took me shopping for new clothes. Her generosity and kindness were a stark contrast to the neglect I had experienced before. Despite the nurturing environment, there were times when I felt overwhelmed. I was carrying the weight of my past while trying to build a future. Margaret's unwavering support gave me the strength to push through, but there were moments when the trauma felt like an insurmountable barrier. Things seemed to settle down, and I began to find my footing. My grades improved, and I started to make friends who accepted me for who I was. But just as I was starting to feel stable, a new challenge emerged. My grandmother fell ill. It was a sudden and severe illness that required hospitalization. The news was a blow. Margaret had always been my rock, and seeing her in a hospital bed was a harsh reminder of how fragile life could be. I spent countless hours at her bedside, praying for her recovery and trying to stay strong despite the fear and uncertainty. During this difficult time, my father and Catherine reappeared in my life, this time with a different agenda. They reached out to me, seeking to claim my grandmother's house and the inheritance she had left behind. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. I had thought that the worst of my past was behind me, but now I faced a new battle. The thought of losing the only stable home I had known since leaving Indiana was terrifying. Catherine and my father were relentless. They tried to manipulate the situation, claiming that Margaret's will was invalid and demanding access to the house and the $500,000 inheritance left to me. Margaret's condition worsened, and I had to focus on her well-being while trying to handle the legal mess that had suddenly become part of my life. I sought help from legal advisors to understand my rights and the best way to protect what was rightfully mine. It was a difficult time, balancing my grandmother's care and fighting against my father and Catherine's claims. The emotional strain was immense, and I often found myself on the edge of breaking down. Yet, amidst all this turmoil, I found strength in Margaret's teachings. She had always been a fighter, and her resilience became my guiding light. Every day, I would visit Margaret, read to her, and talk about the good times we had shared. I hoped that my presence would give her some comfort and strength, even as I struggled with the external pressures. My grandmother's illness was a stark reminder of how precious and fragile the things we hold dear can be. As I navigated these challenges, I realized that the true battle was not just against my father and Catherine, but against the lingering shadows of my past. It was a struggle to reclaim my sense of self, my right to a stable and safe life, and to honor the memory of the person who had always been my beacon of hope. The fight was far from over, but I knew that with Margaret's strength and my own growing resilience, I could face whatever came next. As my grandmother's health deteriorated, the battle for the house and the inheritance became more intense. The stress of managing her illness while dealing with my father and Catherine's demands was overwhelming. It felt like I was fighting a war on two fronts, one to save Margaret's life and the other to protect what she had left me. My father and Catherine were relentless. They began by threatening legal action, claiming that Margaret's will was invalid due to some obscure technicalities they had discovered. They argued that the house and the $500,000 inheritance were rightfully theirs. The stress of these constant threats and legal maneuvers felt like a never-ending storm cloud hanging over me. Margaret's hospital room became a place of refuge and despair. I would sit by her bed, clutching her hand, and try to keep her spirits up. It was hard to see her so frail, her once vibrant energy now diminished. Despite my best efforts, I could feel the weight of my past and the current pressures crashing down on me. But I refused to give up. Margaret had always been my pillar of strength, and I was determined to honor her legacy by standing up for myself and her wishes. The legal battles were exhausting. I hired a lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, who specialized in estate disputes. He was compassionate and understood the emotional toll the situation was taking on me. He guided me through the complexities of the law, preparing documents and evidence to defend my grandmother's will. Mr. Jacobs explained that the inheritance and the house were legally mine, as long as we could prove the validity of the will and defend against the challenges from my father and Catherine. Every day, I would juggle hospital visits with meetings with Mr. Jacobs. It was a grueling routine, and there were times when I felt like I was on the brink of collapse. The pressure was immense, and the legal threats from my father and Catherine seemed to grow more aggressive. One afternoon, while going through Margaret's belongings in the house, I found a hidden envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Margaret addressed to me. It was a powerful and emotional message that revealed a lot about her thoughts and intentions. In the letter, she spoke of her love for me, her pride in my accomplishments, and her wish for me to stand strong despite the challenges I faced. Margaret had anticipated the possibility of conflict and had left specific instructions on how to handle any legal disputes. The letter included details about her will and the reasons behind her decisions. It was a reminder of her strength and her unwavering belief in my ability to overcome adversity. The letter became a source of strength for me during this tumultuous time. It reaffirmed my commitment to protect her legacy and uphold her wishes. With the letter in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was clear that Margaret had prepared for this, and her words gave me the resolve I needed to continue fighting. I met with Mr. Jacobs to discuss the new evidence and strategize our next steps. The letter was a crucial piece of evidence that demonstrated Margaret's clear intentions and her understanding of the potential challenges. The legal proceedings became more intense. My father and Catherine used every trick in the book to undermine our case. They hired their own lawyers, who tried to discredit Margaret's will and question my credibility. It was a painful and humiliating process, but I refused to back down. Throughout this period, I leaned heavily on my support system. Friends from the university, colleagues, and even former teachers offered their encouragement and assistance. Their support was invaluable in helping me maintain my sanity and stay focused on the battle at hand. Despite the emotional and physical exhaustion, there were moments of light. Margaret's condition showed small improvements, and she was occasionally able to communicate with me, even if just through gestures. Her presence, even in her weakened state, was a reminder of the love and strength that had guided me through so much. One particularly pivotal moment came when Mr. Jacobs managed to arrange a mediation session with my father and Catherine. The goal was to reach a settlement and avoid a lengthy court battle. I hoped that a direct conversation might lead to an understanding or resolution. During the mediation, emotions ran high. My father was visibly agitated, and Catherine's cold demeanor remained unchanged. I presented the letter from Margaret, along with other evidence, to reinforce our position. The letter had a profound impact on the proceedings. It was clear that Margaret's wishes were legally and emotionally compelling. The mediation ended with no immediate resolution, but the session made it evident that my father and Catherine were aware of the strength of our position. They seemed to reconsider their approach, realizing that continuing the battle might not be in their best interest. As I left the mediation room, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. The battle was far from over, but I had taken significant steps to defend Margaret's legacy. The struggle had tested my limits, but it had also revealed my inner strength and resilience. The fight for the house and the inheritance was far from over, but I knew that with Margaret's guidance, Mr. Jacob's expertise, and my own determination, I could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The past had shaped me, but it was the present and the future that I was determined to protect and build. The culmination of the legal battles came sooner than I expected. Despite the challenges, my determination and Margaret's letter played a crucial role in turning the tide. The mediation session had shaken my father and Catherine, and their once aggressive stance began to waver. It became clear that continuing their fight was not only futile, but could also further damage their reputation. One crisp autumn morning, Mr. Jacobs called with some surprising news. My father and Catherine had decided to settle out of court. They had agreed to withdraw their claims on the house and the inheritance in exchange for a modest financial settlement. It was not the outcome I had originally hoped for, but it was a victory nonetheless. The house and the inheritance would remain mine, and I could finally put the past to rest. The settlement agreement was finalized and the legal documents were signed. As I walked through the empty rooms of Margaret's house, I felt a profound sense of closure. The house, once a battleground of my past traumas, now represented my resilience and the love Margaret had given me. I knew that moving forward, I had the power to shape my own future. Margaret's passing was a deeply sorrowful event. Her death left a void in my life that no one could fill. Yet, her legacy lived on through the strength she had instilled in me and the lessons she had taught me. I organized a small ceremony to honor her memory, inviting close friends and family who had supported me through the trials. It was a poignant and emotional moment, reflecting on the journey we had shared. With the house now securely in my possession, I made it a priority to transform it into a place of healing and peace. I spent time renovating and decorating, creating a home that honored Margaret's memory while reflecting my own growth and independence. Each room I restored felt like a step toward reclaiming my sense of self and moving beyond the shadows of my past. One evening, while sitting in the sunlit living room, I thought back on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the battles, the triumphs, it all seemed like a distant memory compared to the tranquility I now felt. I realized that I had come full circle, from a frightened child trapped in an abusive environment to an empowered woman who had reclaimed her life. My father and Catherine eventually faded from my life. Their influence diminished. They had made their choices, and their actions had consequences. As for me, I had learned that I could not control the actions of others, but I could control how I responded to them. The lessons I had learned from Margaret and the strength I had discovered within myself were invaluable. I continued my work at the University of Chicago, where my experiences added depth and empathy to my teaching. My past had shaped me, but it had also fueled my desire to help others and make a positive impact. The stories of resilience and overcoming adversity that I shared with my students were rooted in my own experiences, and it was fulfilling to see them find strength in their own journeys. The house in Chicago became a symbol of my personal victory. It was no longer just a place of memories. It was a testament to the power of standing up for oneself and the importance of perseverance. Each time I walked through its rooms, I was reminded of the love and strength that had guided me through the darkest times. The story of my life is not just one of hardship and struggle, but also of triumph and transformation. It's a story of finding strength in adversity, embracing the love that surrounds us, and ultimately creating a future that reflects our true selves. I had faced betrayal and heartache, but I had emerged stronger and more resilient. As I look back, I realized that the journey wasn't just about fighting for a house or inheritance. It was about reclaiming my sense of self and honoring the memory of those who had truly cared for me. The final chapter of the story is not just about the battles won, but about the peace and fulfillment that comes from knowing I have lived my life with courage and integrity.